Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of the AI executive order that was recently released. Hopefully you're not living under a rock and you're aware that it's out there. And we think it's a great opportunity to talk about it a little bit more, talk about some of the good things that are there and some of the challenges that may be lurking as well. So I got a wonderful cast here with me today, or a wonderful crew here with me today. And we'll go around the horn and we'll start with Amanda. If we could, please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your perspective on this topic.
Hi, my name is Amanda Bickerstaff. I am the CEO and co-founder of AI for Education. We are an organization fully focused on responsible adoption of AI in schools, K-12 and higher education, and have a commitment to AI literacy for 1 million educators. And we are well on our way. We're probably we're closer to 300,000 educators in our 2 years so far, which is pretty great. And I think for us, I think the funny thing that happened is that I'm called an AI optimist and a pessimist in the same week by different people. So we take a very balanced approach. We believe that there is an enormous need for an informed electorate on AI and AI literacy. But with any technology and one that's going so fast, it's really important to understand both the capabilities, limitations, opportunities, and concerns. So we really do try to take a balanced approach.
Wonderful. Welcome. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. And next, I guess I'll go to Matt.
Hello, everybody. Patrick, thank you for having me this afternoon, and it's wonderful to be accompanied by James and Amanda. My name is Matt Giovanello. I am the CEO and co-founder of an edtech organization called Trinalytics, and we operate in the special education, English language learning, and MTSS space. We help with automating progress monitoring and data collection among students with unique learning needs and nervous disabilities, and helping save teachers a little bit of time along the way and responsibly and a little bit with a more cautionary mood and tempo than maybe some other edtech orgs implementing AI. So I'm excited to be able to share my perspective on this and hearing a little bit about what Amanda and James have to say. But my big takeaway from the recent EOs is not only funding and how this is actually going to come about, but also making sure that we are considering students across the entire spectrum, not just the average student or most students. We want to make sure that everybody's included. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Welcome, Matt. And last but certainly not least, James.
Hi, sorry for my waving. I wasn't waving at everybody. Somebody walked into my office. I'm James O'Hagan. I'm an educator of over 25 years. Currently, I'm a consultant, but also a all but dissertation completed student at Northern Illinois University in the field of instructional technology and design. I come into this conversation with over 25 years of experience, both in education, technology, looking at student voice. And what I've learned really, and sometimes the hard way, is that we introduce technology into schools with that, and we know it's never neutral. And I think that's just about, we always think about it just being tools, but really it's about power. And that's why I found this executive order really so troubling, because it frames AI education not as a civic responsibility or a space for critical thinking, but as a race for global dominance and an economic scale question. That's not educational vision. That's a policy script written in the language of obedience and speed. So when we talk about AI in schools, we really need to ask better questions about who is being served, who is being shaped, who gets to say no. My thinking has evolved over time on this. If you've read some of my writings, I think that's important as we evolve our conversations, as we evolve our thinking about this. I once saw AI literacy as a skills-based issue. And even today, I saw, Amanda's post about the new OCED AI literacy, but what I really see is something deeper. It's about systems. It's about culture. It's about protecting the human core of what education is. So I look at AI as 6 pillars for my core commitments. It's got to be treated as a social, cultural, political, and ethical, not just a technical issue. Real literacy has to be with critical literacy, not just tool adoption. And we need to have refusal as a form of civic power, not fear. We have to think about learning, and it must be student driven and meaning centered, that education must stay human, not machine optimized, and that we cannot talk about equity or agency unless we are willing to name the power in every system we use. And one of the things I looked for immediately in that OCED document was the word power, and it never showed up. So I'm looking at this, Amanda, I'm sorry, I'm going to look at this document in a different way, much more critically, because I think that's the lens I bring to the conversation. I'm not anti-technology in any way, but technology I want it to be bringing student voice to the center. I want it bringing teacher advocacy. I'm worrying that we are outsourcing pedagogy to the private sector in a number of ways. If we want to get serious about AI in schools, then we have to be serious about who governs it and who gets to walk away when it harms.
Great. Well, we are in for a very interesting conversation today, I'm sure. And I welcome you all. I welcome the transparency and the open discussion. And I want to lean into a couple of the opening comments here a little bit, and let's see if we can distill down. This executive order has been released, and let's see if we can distill down what do we agree on in terms of what some of the real opportunities are, what some of the challenges are, and see where we align on those things. Because kind of the thought behind this whole podcast is we find the places that we agree and we lean into those, and we can still make progress even if we don't agree on every aspect of it. So, does anybody want to start?
I don't mind.
Sure.
I just to say that someone in that is very anti AI education wrote a pretty strong, almost like very negative attack on people that said anything about the EO Act, the AI EO, and we were called technofascists from my LinkedIn post. My LinkedIn post was really, which I found really interesting, because my LinkedIn post I sat with for 3 or 4 hours because I couldn't figure out how to frame my thinking in a way that would be balanced, which we do try to do. And so what I ended up coming up with is less about the things that I liked about it and more about the questions I had. And so, but it was really interesting though, because it was like, if you said anything at all about the act, it became this like almost political statement but realistically, what's interesting is that, there are usually very few EOs around education, and there were 7 in a day. And I think we have to look at the broader scope before we even get down to the tactics about this. And it's something that I had reached out to Jamie about when putting the questions together, is that the majority of the EOs that came out in the day were really attacks on DEI, on, there were really political statements that were couched in AI in terms around education. It was interesting, though, the ones that are a little bit like, maybe not quite as aggressively anti-DEI were really a lot around what James said in the top, is like workforce, about building this workforce through apprenticeships or whatever that looked like, and public-private partnerships, all those pieces. So I think what I found really interesting about the EO, I could call it an app, but the EO was, it was very much about building a workforce and not building an AI literate society to be able to continue to have and make informed decisions, to have power in the moment, to have agency, to give teachers and leaders and students and families an opportunity to like take advantage of this moment in time, to be able to make decisions. And so I think that if you talk about what we do around AI literacy, the fact that it was at least included in the document and it was one of the 7 that came out was at least a signal that this is important. Because we know that a lot of schools and districts, regardless of what they think about this, have not done any real work yet on just starting to approach this arrival technology that is already changing the way that work works, the work and industry and school. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think we always have to take the broader view around why political actions happen. But for us, I say the positive is that AI literacy was in there. And there was at least mentions, maybe not very strongly to James' point, around teaching and support in that way. That gave us, that was the things that we found most positive.
I look at this and say, okay, the opportunity was here to really center AI literacy, if we're going to use that phrase, in democracy, in agency, and critical thought. And the challenge is that the order reduces AI to a skill set framed in terms of utility and economic value. It's not justice. It's not civic responsibility. people who talk about future readiness, well, future readiness without agency isn't education, it's training. And we're building systems in the executive order as it's framed. We're building systems that are about obeyance. Even now, as we passed the one big beautiful bill last night out of the House, the AI, the legislation about AI, even in that bill, and we have to talk about that if we're going to talk about the executive order, because I feel like the two go hand in hand. They're talking about that states and local governments. When we're talking local governments, we're also talking about school boards, school districts, state organizations cannot legislate in any way, shape, or form any sort of regulation over AI. That is scary as hell, because if we just look at it from a lens of today, like, okay, some people may say, well, that's not such a big deal, but the lens isn't today, the lens is 10 years. So we're talking about the potential of predictive AI not being able to be legislated at a state or a local level. That to me is scary as hell. So, again, when we're talking about the future that we are preparing students for in the executive order, it sounds more like obeying systems and not questioning or changing them. That's the thing I think that separates us and our education system. People will crap on our education system all they want, but when you study history, part of my background is I have a history minor, specifically in looking at Soviet Russian history and looking at the education system in Russia. And it was a compliance system. It was an obeyance system. And I think a lot of the reasons why we had such technological leaps in the 60s, the 70s, even going into the 80s, was because we do have a democratic system where people could say no, people could push back, people can have discourse. And unfortunately, I think because we know that AI systems are largely trained on the same models, because we know that there's bias embedded in the system, and because now that there's the reorganization of the Department of Education and they're going to go to a block grant structure, guess what? We know with block grants, there's very specific things that have to be in those block grants. And if it is saying that we can't regulate AI or make the changes, that then puts us at a clear disadvantage at the state level, where this becomes a very top-down control, compliance, obeyance system is my biggest concern.
Yeah,
I think, James, it's funny you bring up legislation. I think that I don't even know if a lot of states are ready to embrace that yet. Do they need to? In my opinion, yes, but there's not even guidance out for more than half of the states. Only 22 out of 50 have guidance published at all. 28 out of 50 in DC don't. New York, Florida, Texas, some of the largest states in the country have nothing. New York is still trying to pass through the legislature right now, any sort of guidance to begin with. If that's step 1 and legislation step 10, we're trying to get to step 100, we can't run before we walk. That's the kind of the biggest piece that I picked up on when reading EO. It felt like some were half sentences, and maybe that was intentional, maybe it wasn't. But if the states are to finish those sentences, then we're relying on public-private partnerships to finish those sentences. I think we need to be more prescriptive about the ways that's going to happen. I live in New York. I would think that we would try and be a leader in that, given the size and the diversity of our students, that we have nothing. And I think that if we're not starting from solid foundations, we have a very long way to go.
But what the federal government just did was they took even that possibility out of states' hands completely, 100%. The only way that you can make legislation about AI now, if this bill passes the Senate and gets signed by the president, is that you have to basically grease the wheels to bring in more AI. You cannot impede the flow of AI in. And when we talk about, you've brought up, and I know we're going to talk about private-public partnerships, but those are really about not just resources, they're about control. Vendors shape what students learn about AI. Then AI literacy becomes platform governance. It's not public education. So industry brings innovation, and access schools need is what I'm sure a lot of you will say, but access without voice is not equity. If public systems implement private agendas, students and teachers lose control over the meaning of literacy. And literacy is what we need to talk about, because literacy is the ability to say no. Literacy is the voice of rebellion. Literacy in its core is such a powerful thing. And again, I look at this and looking at history, this is not just adopting another app. This is not like, hey, we're going to bring, Google Apps for Education into our school. Isn't that wonderful? I was an early adopter of Google Apps for Education. This is an entirely different beast. And I look at this and go, just because, again, the compliance, the bias it's built into the systems, the private-public partnerships and access, I think, again, we're putting hands in people who we don't even anticipate as being a part of our school systems. But now, I don't want to have Magic School AI being the decider of what is truth and what isn't in my classroom, let's say. There needs to be some very serious guidelines and guide rails around this.
Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit more about the public-private partnerships. James, you have a very distinct impression about how this is shifting power to people that are really not supposed to be in charge of our education. But as yet, industry getting involved, the private sector getting involved, does provide an influx of capital into the system which we need, and is an industry that I personally am very dependent on. Do we? I don't know. I'd love to hear other perspectives, kind of on that. And are there suggestions or alternatives as to how we can use those partnerships in a fashion that does allow for the contributions to continue without some of the negative side effects?
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question as well, like indirectly, but I think that one thing we haven't talked about that is underlying this is that all of this is a race towards like owning the large language models towards AGI or super intelligence. The ultimate goal of all technical and major tech companies right now that are building large language models are to build artificial general intelligence, which is super intelligence, however you want to call it. And we are in a race with not just China, but India and other non-American, EU as well, parts of the world. And that is where we're flowing an enormous amount of money into these large language models, into these companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, Mistral in France, et cetera. And so I think that we can talk as much as we want about public and private partnerships, but realistically, the fuel to this is two things. One is data. And so a lot of the public-private partnerships, whether that's Google creating Gemini for teens and then launching a home-based Gemini for under 13 years old in the fall, which I think this is not the point of this conversation, but is an enormous red flag. Like it could be enormously impactful in a negative way. But the reason why they're doing that, and the reason why ChatGPT and Gemini were free for college students, is because we want to start to create even more data and training data to be able to do more and more of these of the scaling laws of getting to better and better, generative AI to get to super intelligence. So I think that realistically, the public-private partnerships to me is actually really not even the point. I don't see that they're like Magic School, to your point, James. Like they're going to be they're the fastest growing ed tech ever, but they're really not making fundamental shifts into the way that people learn. What will is this unfettered access to chatbot use of all ages that is designed to drive as much user data transfer as possible. And so I just kind of want to point that out, and that's not going to stop even if this EO came out or didn't come out. This would not stop. About regulation, to your point, James, it's one of the reasons why there's a 10-year hold on that, is because they're trying to get to a quantum of time where AGI will be possible from most scientists' perspectives. But it really is like right now, it's kind of like, what control does education have at all in this process, or even the government, really, considering the profit motive is really going to continue to push for bigger, better, more data, more data use, et cetera. And so I think that while we could talk about the public-private partnerships, I just don't see that being a really big impact on how schools work anytime soon, outside of the impact of these large tech companies that already have a huge footprint, like Google. You talk about Google Apps. Google Classroom is, they are selling Gen AI hard into Google Classroom in the next couple of years, or Microsoft Copilot and Teams like that. And OpenAI has now a K-12 division. They're going hard after higher education, and they will continue to push in to our education system as much as they can for as long as they can.
And James,
go ahead. Sorry, Matt.
Sorry, a quick comment, Amanda, based on what you mentioned, James, to your point earlier. I think the Magic Schools of the world and the school AIs and all of these other chatbot-friendly teacher lesson generation, all of the AI co-grading pieces, I think a little bit, and I don't want to call them final mile to belittle the the benefits and the service that they offer, but they're all being trained by the same core group of LLMs. And so if we have concerns about the source of what's being generated by them and that pedagogy is being altered, I wouldn't necessarily cast the blame, not suggesting that you are, on a single ed tech provider, although they are the conduit for delivering it. But I think it's the way that OpenAI's models are being trained, that Llama, that DALL-E, that whatever we're using, Gemini, DeepSeek, if it goes outside the country, like the way that these models are all being trained. And when we don't know how they're being trained or that they're done by majority non-educators, majority non-researchers, that's what concerns me. And I think that akin to a series of textbooks that schools and districts would procure years ago, like that's the source of what teachers are disseminating to their students. But at least it was a little bit more transparent. Now we don't know as much. And so I just wanted to call that out in favor of some of the comments you were making. And then for public-private, a super quick comment there. I think to me, when I read that, it's a little bit of a moot point if we don't know where the dollars and the finances are going to follow from that mandate. I don't think anything's going to realistically change if there's no financial motive from either government or state or philanthropy to engage those public-private partnerships. It's just going to be the same as it is now.
Let's look at even just this morning, what was announced. Magic School is developing an operating system that I talk with tech directors all the time. I'm in a network of them. I was a tech director myself, many places. It's not an operating system anybody has asked for. Nobody asked for this. But what I do know is that a company like Magic School, and I'm sorry, Adil, that you're not here to talk about this, they have to answer to their venture capitalists. They have to grow for the sake of growth. And Amanda, you brought up, what Google is trying to do right now. Google has hit the top as far as they can go with search. They're not having growth in search. They're not having growth in ads. What's the next place they can grow? And that, again, they are answering to their investors. I struggled with this thought, looking at this question, and I know we're kind of moving past the public-private partnership question, but I think it's really important because tell me where a public-private partnership has shifted power towards students and educators and not just towards vendors and investors. I really struggle with that because private-public partnerships do tend to shift towards the power advantage towards vendors and investors. And again, that's why I come back to that word power. I come back to that word compliance. I come back to the first point we make about, serving systems and having teachers, look at the Alpha School model where a teacher is not even called a teacher anymore. They're called a guide. That to me is a troubling phrase because I didn't get into education to be called a guide. A teacher as a word, not just has a cultural meaning, it has a historical meaning, a meaning of reverence, especially, Amanda, you brought up India. In the Indian culture where a teacher is seen as a revered class, they are top of the hierarchy in a caste system. I don't want to give that term up. And I feel again that public-private partnerships really start to shift again that power away from teachers and towards vendors and investors, unfortunately.
Can I be pedantic for just 1 second? Because I know there are people listening. We've been using we were talking about application layers like Magic School. We've been using trained as if the application layers are training Llama or ChatGPT's models, and that's not what's happening. So I just want to kind of put a point on this because it's so confusing. Essentially, we have foundation models that are underpinning ChatGPT's interface, Gemini's interface, Claude's interface. In fact, Claude just launched Claude 4 if anybody wants to hang out with Claude. But what happens with the application layers is that they are using the APIs into the foundation models and then they're doing fine tuning or they're doing prompt injections or prompting in the application. So they actually have even less control than what we're talking about, just because this is the reason why I want to kind of be a little bit pedantic, because the foundation model makers have the control of this. If they, for example, with GPT-4, which is what started the whole train 2 years ago, it was completely degraded, meaning they have removed all support for it and the model is off the market. That actually changes every time something changes, every time a prompt, there's a new system prompt or there are all these different pieces, it actually changes what goes into these application layers. So it's really interesting. And to the point that Matt, you were making, and just in general, is that because these systems are probabilistic, they carry these biases that go way beyond just like the idea that a CEO would never look like me, which we know from a lot of prompting, and it make people laugh every time when you try to show what an unconventional CEO is, and it's just like a dude, but now he's wearing colorful pants. Is that this is real? But what's interesting is that there have been studies recently. There are 3 studies that I think are really strong that show that these generative systems have biases for teacher-centered instruction, that they are prioritizing like the old way of not, we talk about being a teacher, but we're talking about the sage on the stage, direct instruction, explicit instruction.
Worksheets.
Worksheet, direct instruction. They prioritize in grading. They give kids C's more than anything else. So they're going to the average, and there's statistical significance that they grade Black students statistically significant lower than any other demographic. And that there is biases around the ways in which stories are told about students, where struggling students in different types of classrooms are always the same. Like a struggling student in English, you could probably guess is a boy, because that's the way we think about this. And not just a boy, but a minority boy. And so I think that in STEM, it's a girl. And so the reason why I think these are so important, when we talk about these public and private partnerships, let's say that we do give, school AIs or magic schools, or, and I believe that they are trying to create good things and it's meaningful, but they're coming through these enormous limitations that they really have no control over. It's not like traditional technology where you like building your code and then you can fix it and make it better. Like these foundation models and the way that they are built and the way that they are changed are going to impact downstream everything. I think it's even more interesting because even when you have good actors are trying to build these really, that people are trying to build meaningful ed tech products with generative AI, they're significantly limited based on how the underlying technology works.
Well, and a lot of them offload the LLMs to third parties. So again, let's take, School AI and Magic School. They're not developing their own LLM. It's in their documents far down. You have to dig in and see where the data is going. And again, as a tech director and somebody who is concerned about the data, not saying that you all aren't, but the data footprint of my students, I have to know exactly where that's going. There's some groups that I want to do business with, and there's some groups I don't want to do business with. And if I choose not to do business with them, but I've been given this pre-wrapped system where in the documentation, it literally says, we may choose to at any time change the model that is in this wrapped product. That's problematic because I won't know who or what it is. Can I choose the products that I want to use based off of whether it goes to Claude or whether it goes to Gemini? I want to know that. Again, the power is being taken out of the teacher's hands with a lot of these things. It's troubling to me that we are being so willing to abdicate the control of our classrooms to third-party products that, again, are not necessarily always transparent about what is happening with their companies. We should be asking a lot more questions about this than we are. I don't want to treat AI literacy or any of this as onboarding for teachers. Onboarding is to me is like, get on board. This is what you're going to be doing versus and I think where Amanda really wants this to be is not about onboarding, but really getting people to think critically about what it is that they are even considering adopting. That's where I think we miss. And again, not saying that by saying no, you're not the troublemaker. By saying, no, I don't want to be a part of this system, you are being critical about what it is that happens in your classroom. But a district I used to work for, Rockford Public Schools, where I still have a number of friends and teachers, they just were featured by Magic School. But there was a lot of people who were not comfortable with that shift. They were not comfortable with that tool being brought into the classroom because of a lot of the data privacy concerns around it. And I'm sorry if I'm going off the rails a little bit here. I'll stop now and see the time.
Yeah,
I can go down a rabbit hole. So easy to go down a rabbit hole here.
It's real though, because like we work with one of the biggest districts in the country, and we're trying to do a PLC on tool piloting. And what we found is that like there's just not enough AI literacy to even know what the tools mean. And we've had, so the last session was supposed to be this like implementation session, but we had to go back to basics. And I think that the EO itself, and the reason why I think we're all here, is that like, it just does not set out AI literacy in terms of the fundamentals and foundations of being able to make good decisions about what these are and aren't, is just not what the priority was in that. And it hasn't been. And it definitely doesn't trickle down to like students or families or caregivers. And I think that is, it's so funny. We believe that we thought we were going to get into our second year. We're going to change exactly everything that we do because people will know more about what this is. And we have not, because it's just not the case. Like, it's too early. It's too new. It's too complex. It's moving too fast. And if we don't prioritize AI literacy meaningfully now, before it gets out of our control even more in terms of what it even means and becomes even more unexplainable, I think that is where, when I sat down and was trying to write about it, I was like, oh, I don't, like, I want that so badly for us.
So
What I'm hearing you say, Amanda, to your point is, again, back to the teachers don't need onboarding. They need the preparation to interrogate, not just integrate AI tools. Like the PD, should be about more than system fluency. It should be about system fluency, not just tool fluency. Because the question I have is, should teachers be trained to use tools they never helped choose? Or should teachers be empowered to assess what those tools do to their students? And I think, again, where a lot of the onboarding is taking place is around, here is the tool, but again, they don't have the power to interrogate the system of which they are being onboarded into.
So I have to interrupt a little just for the purpose of time here. This is fascinating. I don't want to stop it. And I'm going to go a little off. I'm going to go in a little different direction, because I don't think we've been able to get through the whole conversation, certainly. And I'd like to continue this conversation when we know a little bit more about how things are rolling out, when we know a little bit more about where they're going, pick it back up. But what I would suggest that we should do in the meantime, and we have time for everybody to have a couple of thoughts on, so what do we do to mitigate the risk or exposure? What can we do as educators, as organizations that own ed tech companies or work in the space? What can we do to mitigate the risk or the exposure? Because I hear there's a lot more to this than people are aware, and the risks go far deeper than we think they should. So what should we do about it? And let's talk a little bit about what we should do about it, and then when we come back, we'll say, did we do it? Did that work? Did it not work? And how much more do we know at that time? Is it fair?
Mm-hmm.
So, Matt, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. So I think some of the answers can be found within the EO itself, even if, in my opinion, they are half sentences. In about 3 months from now, we should know the source of some of the competitive, the block, and the discretionary grants under the Secretary of Education per the order. In about 4 months from now, we should know the NSF's involvement in funding some of the research and some of the additional SBIR and similar grant-based opportunities that EdTech and EdTech adjacent research organizations should be able to take advantage of. The problem with that, though, is that's back to school. And so we are wasting an entire summer, and now states don't have any directive to give to school districts. School districts don't have any directive to give to their building leaders, and building leaders don't have any directive to give to their teachers, and teachers don't have any directive to give to their students and to their parents. And I find that a little bit problematic. I don't necessarily want to suggest that the onus is on districts and schools, because there's already a lot of onus on them. But I do think that there's a little bit of a self-starter mentality that we, for better or for worse, will need to take into our own hands, me saying our on behalf of the schools and districts, in order to be more forward thinking about AI instead of simply sitting on our hands and waiting for this guidance to come when it might be a little bit too late to at this point. I do think that there's some merit to public-private partnerships. I also, at the same time, agree, James, however ironic this may sound, as an EdTech organization founder, that there's a lot of bias in giving all that power in a one-sided direction in and of itself. I do think that there's the possibility of non-biased or minimally biased and mutually beneficial partnerships between private EdTech orgs and school districts. Now, the question is, how do we find those, do so quickly, but also do so sustainably and responsibly? I don't have an answer for that, but that's what I'm seeing in terms of the timeline and what I think we need to be doing in the next couple of months on behalf of each of those groups, and then letting the legislation catch up to us a little bit and seeing whether we met that mark Otherwise, are we missing out on a third of the year or more?
Amanda, how about you?
I get asked this question a lot because I think that people are like, oh, like AI for education is going to get like a lot of like opportunity here. And so I think for the timeline, I think to Matt, your point, I'd be very interested to see if those things actually happen. Knowing how much NSF grants are being gutted and returned, knowing the defunding that's happening, knowing what's happening with the Department of Education, I'd be very interested to see if we hold to these timelines and if this is not just a political statement or is something that's actually substantiated and substantial with funding and supports. I think that for me, like being the, on the side of, we would love to have ability to get in and to support schools more. I think that for me, like in 6 months, will this really, is it real or is it just a political statement? And then based on that, I mean, it's not going to stop what we do. So like, it won't change anything that we do necessarily, because we're going to continue to keep working the way we can to build AI literacy. But I think we'll know more about what the federal government is really trying to do in this moment in time. So I think to James' point, like we can be as connected and be as negative as possible. And it might be true, honestly. This is like we're living in a really difficult timeline, everybody. But it may be there are going to be glimmers of hope. Maybe there are going to be good things to come out of this. And I think we'll know a lot more in 6 months.
And I don't want to say this again. I'm not anti-tech. I'm not anti-tool. But I really feel like the one thing that we really need to do is we need to interrupt this inevitability framing. I know the executive order does that. The big, beautiful bill does that. It's making AI feel inevitable. One of the things that, again, separates our education system from a lot of the world is that we are a system that is designed to hopefully, I mean, it's shifted from the early 1900s to where, post Sputnik and into the 2000s, it is still one of our great democratic tools. And I really think we need to bring the conversation and recenter it back around a lens of where does this EO fit in the voice of democracy, in the voice of agency, and in the voice of justice. If we can filter it through those things, if we can filter where the conversation through that mode, I think at least it will get us thinking more about this rather than a tool adoption scheme that is going to, I think, benefit big tech. We're even seeing we can get into the COSA law being brought into this as well too, which is going to protect a lot of big tech. It's not going to protect kids in my mind. And if people want to read about that, I've written about that as well too. But we really need to think about this and contrast as literacy for civic capacity versus literacy as tool adoption. I think that the AI literacy models, if we're going to call them AI literacy models, need to be around civic capacity first and foremost. Even if we want to talk about tool adoption. And to Amanda's point, a lot of people don't have the language yet for AI literacy adoption because they don't really understand the terms. But most of us went to high school. Most of us took a civics class. We did have to take some basic, at least in the United States, we had to take basic skills about our founding of our country. We should go back to, again, civic capacity. What does this tool actually mean for us in a democratic society in our schools? And we need to look at it through a lens of bias. We need to look at it through a lens of justice and a lens of power and compliance.
Great. And I so appreciate this real fevered discussion. I think the takeaways that I get from this are, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is this smells like it could have some real risks of just a purely political move, of just a purely tech-centric move, and something that the public generally does not have even the slimmest of understandings yet. So in order to have real literacy, there's a lot more understanding that's going to be required. And this is the opportunity for people to stand up and talk about what's important to them. We will learn more in time. We will see more come out of this. But what we don't want to see, and I don't think there was anybody that disagreed with this, we don't want this to be at the expense of education. We want to find a way to make sure that it's enriching education. And that's That's the real reason why we're talking about it, and the real reason why we all have to stand up and speak. It's fair, and I'm genuine about the desire to have you guys back in maybe 6 months, talk about how far we've come and what really we've seen materialize, and what still is just kind of not smoke and mirrors, but fears without cloaked or veiled. Appreciate your time very much. For those of you listening, we appreciate you for listening, and hope you'll join us again next time.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.